others find this content easier. I have lots more true crime and spooky cases planned for you guys this spooky season, so stay tuned. So today we're talking about a case that I'm honestly surprised I had not heard about it. And yeah, it's very, very shocking case to say the least. So I'm going to title this the Laff in the Dark Funhouse case, and we'll explain why, but that is the name of a ride. So let's get to the beginning of my notes. It was December of the year 1976, and for today's story we are going to begin our location in Long Beach, California, at the Pike. Now the Pike was an amusement park located on the beach there in Long Beach, California. And at this amusement park, there was an attraction there named the Laff in the Dark Funhouse. Now, the Laff in the Dark Funhouse contained a roller coaster type cart that would drive people around through the funhouse, and skeletons and other scary items would pop up and startle you as your cart drove around in very, very dim lighting there. Now, the Laff in the Dark Funhouse had been around for quite some time, and there were several wax figures that decorated the ride to help make it seem extra spooky. Now, there was an urban legend amongst kids in the area that one of the wax figures decorating the place looked a little too realistic. A man named Mark Taylor, who created the popular toys He-Man and Skeletor, frequented the Laff in the Dark Funhouse, and he saw a figure there once that scared him, and this was the basis for Skeletor. This figure glowed in the dark and was covered in some neon paint, and it was just a wax figure there. Mark even claimed that in the Laff in the Dark Funhouse that it smelled like a dead body when he would go there when he was younger. Now, on December the 8th in the year 1976, a film crew was preparing to film a scene for the TV show $6 Million Man inside of the Laff in the Dark Funhouse. The main character in the $6 Million Man was going to be riding around on the cart in this funhouse. Now, in the corner of one of the scenes was a wax figure that was seen hanging from the gallows. This wax figure was covered in bright red fluorescent paint, and it was one of the figures that would glow in the dark. A prop man on set was told to move this wax figure. Now, I'm not entirely sure if it just wasn't set in the shot right or why it needed to be moved, but the prop man got the wax figure down, and in the process of doing so, he ended up bumping the wax figure a little too hard, and one of the arms fell off. Now, the prop man, of course, was very concerned with this, and this train contained $400,000 on board. So Elmer very much wanted to rob this train, as he felt he would be set for life after a robbery of this size. Elmer and his crew, however, accidentally somehow got mixed up and ended up robbing a passenger train instead, and not the train that contained $400,000. Elmer and his crew managed to walk away with only $46 and a large amount of whiskey. Now, at the time, this was supposedly the smallest train robbery ever, and they barely made any money for this robbery. Elmer grew very upset by their failed robbery and ended up going and getting drunk and falling asleep in a hay shed, that's hard to say, a hay shed at a nearby ranch. Now, Elmer kind of hung out there and just continued his drinking, not really having a zest for life after his error on the train robbery. And little did Elmer know that he had been spotted and that he was basically wanted for arrest at this point in time. On October the 7th, the police managed to have a bloodhound track Elmer's scent to the hay shed, and there they waited outside with several cops and the bloodhound for Elmer to wake up. So on October the 7th, after Elmer woke up, the police attempted to capture him in the hay shed, but a gunfight ensued. Elmer began shooting at the authorities, and they shot back, where Elmer ended up passing away from a single bullet wound to his chest. After Elmer passed away, his remains were taken in by the undertaker in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. Now, at the time, Elmer was embalmed with a special type of formula that would allow his remains to be preserved for longer, which was typical of the time period when next of kin was unknown. And in Elmer's case, his next of kin was very unknown. The undertaker's name was Joseph Johnson, and when no next of kin came to collect Elmer's remains, Joseph decided to parade around Elmer's body to help pay for the embalming process that took place. Basically, Joseph would not be making any money unless Elmer's family paid for it, and since they were unknown, that's why he decided to parade Elmer's remains around. Joseph would allow others to see Elmer's remains for a nickel, and Joseph called Elmer the bandit who wouldn't give up. That is what he branded the remains as. Now, Joseph continued to show off Elmer's remains around various parts of Oklahoma, and eventually Elmer's remains grew so popular as an attraction that several carnival promoters offered Joseph money for Elmer's remains, but Elmer refused. Joseph refused. Joseph felt as though Elmer was making him enough money at this point in time, and no one was willing to pay top dollar for him. So Joseph James and Charles Patterson ended up parading around Elmer's remains just like Joseph did. However, this time they were with a circus, and they called Elmer the outlaw who would never be captured alive. Elmer's remains stayed with the circus until the year 1922, when he was sold to a man named Louis Sonny. Now, Louis had a traveling museum of crime, which featured wax replicas of famous outlaws such as Jesse James. And at this point in time, Elmer's remains had mummified, and the skin had gotten so tight that the body had shrunk considerably, and I believed it only weighed about 50 pounds. Now, somewhere in this time range, Elmer's remains were dipped in wax to help preserve the remains even further. And I believe this occurred when his remains were in Louis's hands. Now, like I said, Louis had this traveling museum of crime, and Elmer's remains were paraded around with that. Louis eventually passed away, however, and his remains were transferred to his son, who sold Elmer's remains along with several other wax figures to a man named Spoonie Singh. And these wax figures and Elmer's remains were sold for $10,000. Now, Spoonie lent out Elmer's remains to be shown at various shows across the country, and his remains ended up being exhibited at a show at Mount Rushmore. And while there, Elmer's remains were damaged from a windstorm that occurred during the show, and some of the fingers and toes and ears were damaged. After sustaining the damage, Spoonie did not feel as though he could show the remains off anymore, and he ended up selling the remains to a man named Ed Learsh, who was a part owner of the Pike in Long Beach, California. Now, at this point, like I said, Elmer's remains were covered in wax, and I don't believe that they were sold this last time to Ed, with Ed knowing that they were actual remains. It was either an urban legend that they were real remains, but he most likely believed that the remains were just a wax figure and not true human remains.